Everyone loves to say, release it and move on. And it sounds like good advice, but here's the truth that I've learned. If you've just purged years of trauma, toxic patterns, and soul ties, you don't just move on. You integrate. Your nervous system needs time to adjust. Your energy field needs time to stabilize. Your identity needs space to reform without rushing to fill the void. You can't just purge old wounds and move on like nothing happened. You need to sit. You need to feel. And most importantly, you need to relearn yourself. So if you've just done some deep filtering, stop, be still, and ask yourself, who am I without that pattern? What do I truly desire now? What boundaries feel aligned? That is the sacred work that most people skip. And if you skip this part, you'll loop. You'll chase the next hit of healing. You will rebuild your life on shaky ground. Integration isn't sexy. It looks like silence, stillness, and way slower days. But it is the glue that makes your transformation stick. So if your body is asking you to rest, listen to it. That's wisdom, not weakness. Integration makes your healing sustainable. Without it, you are just chasing temporary relief.
What the hell is integration anyway? Integration is a big topic of conversation in the psychedelic renaissance. The term psychedelic integration can mean any sessions or activities following the journey. It's touted as part of a sales pitch for psychedelic therapy trainings, which are attempting to cash in on the current media excitement. Psychedelic integration is advertised by both licensed and unlicensed therapists with little psychedelic experience themselves. And there's a gray, ambiguous territory between offering therapy sessions following a psychedelic journey and actually guiding such an experience. If, by trying to strike a cautionary note, I sound somewhat cynical, that's because I am. I have grave concerns about the monetizing of the psychedelic journey, which for some is more of a gold rush than a renaissance. We don't have a place in our Western culture for mystical experiences that are occasioned by entheogenic journeys. So far, we are medicalizing these experiences. In the psychedelic-assisted studies, integration is supposed to happen in the time-limited therapy sessions following the journey. Evidently, the sooner the better, as there might be a critical period in the weeks following the journey when the brain has increased neuroplasticity and may be more open for rewiring. However, integration doesn't always work in predictable ways, especially when entheogens are used periodically over a lifetime for psychospiritual development, the way the women elders use them. The process is different for each person and for each medicine at each dose. The integration of a numinous experience can take a lifetime to flower. The hope or hype is that psychedelic integration will heal our old traumas, but that's not the same as erasing childhood wounds. We encounter our lifetime scars again and again, no matter how many journeys or how much psychotherapy we do. The intention should be to learn to recognize our patterns so they don't dominate our lives. Jungian Barbara Hanna said the same thing in a different way. Every widening of consciousness is indeed the greatest gain we can make. Almost all of our difficulties in life come from having too narrow a consciousness to meet and understand them. A shift happens that changes the balance between our little schmooze and our capacity to hold them without identifying with them. This shift in perspective is the core of integration. As our inner space expands, we open up to new ways of being. Perhaps we can embrace our polarities with more grace and less projection of blame, or become kinder and more forgiving about our own frailties and failures. I'd rather not talk about integration as a term, but instead, consider lifelong learning about how to be human, how to inhabit our bodies, how to realize our interconnectedness.
Well, then, we then are poised in this strange dimension of diminished possibility. Where are we? what is that? What is it to possess a body such that you can use it as an instrument to turn on and off these places? How does it reflect on the quest for understanding of the here and now? How does it reflect on the quest for, immortality or enlightenment or a sense of fitting in to the cosmic purpose? I don't know. I mean, one can play a reductionist game and say that the human brain mind system is an alarm clock, but EMT is a hammer. Hit the alarm clock with the hammer and you learn all about gears because they spring out and become visible. But, and this is how science works. This is the scientific method. Smash it, then count the pieces. Find the bigger pieces, find the littlest pieces, smash them. Count the pieces, find the little pieces, smash them. That's how it proceeds. Well, obviously, that's not going to take us too far in this domain because it's entirely made up of structure, of connection, of relationship, of thought. And because I'm concerned about the planet and the predicament we're in and the way we spend our resources and cheat our children of a sane future and all that, I keep trying to reconnect this back into the human world. But I frankly don't know whether that can be done. Another area I work in is I try to connect it up to the perennial philosophies of humanity, Zen and Buddhism and shaman. I don't know whether that can be done. The shamans that I have gotten really close to have not been, I would not call, they were able to cure people, but they had no pretension of spiritual accomplishment. They weren't even interested in that. They were interested in what they would call understanding, the same thing which drives a scientist. They say, I mean, Don Fidel, who I took most of my ayahuasca with, we would take it on Saturday nights with a group of about 40 people and cure. And then we would take it on Wednesday nights, just he and I or a couple of other people. And that was for learning. He always said, and he said, you can't cure unless you learn. And I felt very comfortable with these people because it from the outside, it looks like ritual and taboo and power. And from the inside, it's just, hey, let's all cook something up and try to figure it out. It was totally familiar to me from my days in Berkeley in the 60s. It's the head ethic. It's cook it up, try it out, try and make sense of it with your friends. And you see, I think it's very disempowering to believe that somebody else has the answer and that your life consists of sorting out a bunch of options to try and find this person who has the answer. The generous point of view, the ecumenical point of view when looking at the world's religions and spiritual traditions is to say everybody has a piece of the answer. You know, the Buddhists have a piece, the Kabbalists have a piece, everybody has a piece. The mushroom on this subject is extremely ungenerous. It says nobody has a piece. It's just preposterous. You know, the reason the world doesn't make sense to you is because the world doesn't make sense to you. How could it? I mean, look where you're starting from. Where is it writ in adamantine that troops of monkeys should comprehend the architectonics of the cosmos? You know, it's just not part of the deal. So then you have to rest with some kind of provisional arrangement. But I somehow think that the forced evolution of language is how we're going to work our way back into taking care of our planet, and that psychedelics are the catalyst for this. They show us, number one, that there is a transcendent other, which I certainly didn't believe there was till I took psychedelics. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic. I spent a lot of time deconditioning myself from the transcendent other and embracing a kind of materialist agnosticism. Well, that lasted 15 seconds into the first DMT trip, and then that had been vaporized for all time. So I think we need to honor the religious impulse, but I'm very skeptical of all hierarchical con games where the idea is somebody knows something and somebody else doesn't, and then they have to trade off their relationship. You know, the Rolling Stones have a song that says, you don't get what you want, you get what you need. I don't think you're going to spend very long involved with these things at a deep level without scaring your socks off eventually. Well, one of the great things about these psychedelic teachers is that they are so gentle with beginners. And then the flip side of that coin is they are so unforgiving with veterans. And I don't know. I mean, I have hard trips often. And the way I explain it to myself is, you know, I pretty much accept Rupert Sheldrake's notion of the morphogenetic field and feel like the psychedelics amplify the morphogenetic field of the totality. And, you know, why shouldn't I have difficult trips? The totality is in such a weird state of turmoil. I mean, you couldn't pay me to take 5 grams of mushrooms in the present circumstances simply because I can feel the riptides in the historical dimension just churning everything into white water. I mean, I'd stay out of the water till it dies down a little. Fear is a problem because, well, there are different reasons, but here's a reductionist reason. These compounds are CNS stimulants, and that means they're going to stimulate what's called the fight or flight reflex in the hind brain. One of the hardest things I think you have to learn to do is to discipline the hind brain, you know, to sit in a full lotus position, absolutely petrified with fear and not do anything about it, except breathe and sing. Frank Herbert, he has a wonderful thing in there talking about fear. And he says, fear comes like a wind out of the desert and it blows through you. And all you can do is let it blow itself out. And you really can do this. You just wait. Fear is a kind of state of agitation of the organism that chemically cannot maintain itself very long. So wait it through. Then in terms of practical suggestions, sing. You must sing. I mean, it's terrible to have it sit heavily on you and to try and deal with it like this, you know, just crumple. You have to oxygenate your body. You have to begin moving energy through your body. You can sing your way out of most situations. That's the best advice. And you can breathe your way out of most situations. And it's a set of techniques. No, you're quite right. It's a set of techniques. They're very simple, but if you don't know them, you're in deep, deep waters. And breath control and not being afraid to articulate. We have some kind of taboo against sounding. But, you know, I've started in the depths of hell singing to save my soul and managed to sing my way right through normality and right on into heaven, you know. It takes courage. And courage is not something that is demanded of us very much in the modern world. I mean, we occasionally deal with large amounts of fear, like when some jackass cuts in front of you on the freeway and, you know, you soak your clothes with sweat in under a third of a second, those kinds of things. But courage, where we actually determine to do something that feels dangerous or challenging to us, and then doing it, we don't do. And especially boundary dissolving challenges. I mean, the macho type will, climb El Capitan, jump out of airplanes, and that sort of thing. But strangely enough, those macho types are sometimes the most reluctant to just sit quietly in their living room on 5 dried grams, because it's a different kind of surrender. It's a surrender to something feminine and penetrating, and you don't have to. It's the opposite reflex. Surrender is the opposite reflex to conquest.
The elder psychedelic guides know that these medicines are for more than psychiatric symptom relief. They are for sacred journeys. The guides have had to practice underground at great personal risk because our culture doesn't have a sacred container for these medicines to be used in such ways. And our modern Western culture doesn't have a good track record when we do encounter sacred ceremonial use. Consider the Western treatment of indigenous tribes whose use of entheogenic plants is well integrated into their culture via traditional ceremonies and initiations. To this day, we are stealing land and resources from the very people who carry the most sophisticated knowledge of healing plants in the Amazonian jungles. Or consider the tragic outcome when we have encountered sacred medicines. In 1957, R. Gordon Wasson wrote a Life magazine article about the Mazatec curandera, Maria Sabina, and the little saints, or magic mushrooms that she introduced him to. This story inspired a flood of Western psychedelic tourists to find her, which eventually forced Sabina to move from her home to get away from them, since they didn't respect our customs. She said, "From the moment the foreigners arrived to search for God, the saint children lost their purity. They lost their force. The foreigners spoiled them. From now on, they won't be any good. There's no remedy for it." Currently, the psychedelic renaissance exists within the medical and legal institutions of our modern world, not exactly our most spiritual contexts. As we say about so many things, we have to do better. Our Western culture has to learn a variety of ways to work with these sacred medicines for healing and for spiritual insight, and maybe for creative purposes, initiation ceremonies, and preparation for death. The women elders know that these medicines are a way of life, that they open us to larger worlds, that integration is a lifelong process, that we are never done. Psychedelic therapists need psychedelic experience. When I was in private psychotherapy practice, every once in a while I would get a phone call from a prospective client asking me if I practiced a particular approach to therapy, often one that was au courant. Even if I had training in whatever approach the person was seeking, I would never admit it. I always said, "I'm eclectic. I use whatever approach seems best for that particular person at that particular time." As of today, this elder guide has been working with the medicines on herself and with others for decades. Doing so, she said, "We encounter our core wound." "Oh, this again." With a shamanic perspective, Radha agreed. "We can't get away from our family of origin work. Early trauma is a spiritual attack like soul loss. That energy sticks and needs to be cleaned in ceremony." Medrit said, "We can do deep work on family healing," and she often does ceremonies with entire families present. Other elders mentioned family of origin and early life wounding, and how these healing themes resurface over time, even after decades of journeys. Theirs is an important long-term perspective when we consider psychedelic integration. It's too simplistic to assume we integrate an experience and the core issue is resolved. Or if the core issue is not resolved, that we haven't integrated our experience. Psychedelic integration covers a far more complex process of healing and unfolding throughout life. Levels of integration. In this section, I propose several levels of psychedelic integration, but I write it as a psychotherapist. It's not based on my interviews. The elder guides are very clear about their boundaries, and they don't offer psychotherapy as part of their journey work. They are guides, not therapists. Some are willing to do follow-up sessions, but when more is needed, they refer people to a therapist who is a kindred spirit, or they suggest another ceremony. I, however, have spent my adult life either in therapy or practicing therapy, and I think that psychedelic integration, however we describe it, is a vital part of any journey. The most basic level of psychedelic integration, or the simplest approach, especially in a group ceremony, is a sharing circle the morning after, where each person describes an aspect of their experience, usually by holding a talking stick and taking turns. Depending upon the size of the group, each person might have an informal time limit of 5 to 10 minutes. The leader or another participant might be allowed to add a comment, but there's a very limited exchange. The goal is usually reverent listening to the story each person selects to tell from their all-night experience. The next level, which I refer to with a slight snarky intonation, is what I call spa integration. Rest, walk in nature, write in your journal, get a massage, attend a yoga class. These are all good things to do, but they miss the opportunity to sift through an experience, to do the inner work necessary, to reflect and mull over any personal messages and meanings that can emerge from a journey. Such insights or teachings need to be attended to in some way that preserves them for future reflection. If these thoughts are not recorded, they are like dreams that disappear by lunchtime, like gossamer threads that float away in the breeze. What was hard-won overnight can quickly become unavailable to conscious memory, no matter how relaxed the person is. On the other hand, if the person does none of the spa integration suggestions and dives right back into their daily life, they can also lose contact with their ceremony experience and miss any teachings that might arise. In fact, there's a rebound effect that some guides and therapists have begun to notice. Especially when working with ketamine, some people shut down immediately once the drug effect wears off. No matter how open and receptive they might have been during the journey, they revert right back to their defensive structure afterward. This is very frustrating for the therapists who thought they were making amazing progress, only to see the issues buried as deeply as before, with defenses hardened. In the next day or so, some people choose to re-enter an expanded state through meditation, dreams, or listening to the same music from the journey. These are ways to travel back into the ceremony, but in a state of consciousness that's in between the psychedelic experience and consensus reality. This consolidates the experience and keeps it vitally alive for post-ceremony reflection. In the psychedelic-assisted research studies, there are at least 3 90-minute therapy sessions devoted to integration. According to a manual for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, these sessions generally include a discussion of the meaning of memories, thoughts, feelings, and insights experienced during the sessions, and how these new meanings will be manifested in daily living. The therapist will have notes from anything the person said during the session, which can help bring elements of the experience into the light of day and consensus reality. Also, the therapist knows the person's history and can bridge meaning and teachings from the journey into their understanding of the past as they move into the future. The therapeutic relationship is the container for the journey and should be considered a critical aspect of the setting. The continuity between the preparatory sessions, the ceremony, and the follow-up sessions is crucial. It establishes the relationship between guide and patient and encourages the connection from intention to insight to actions. The trust and support during the ceremony help the journeyer to let go during that crucial moment of surrender. And this can make the difference between a traumatizing journey and a mystical one. NYU psychologist Tony Bossis emphasized this in an interview. The therapeutic rapport and trust between the participant and the therapists significantly helps in mitigating anxiety during the psilocybin session. It should be noted that the significance of the therapeutic alliance in traditional psychotherapy is well established from both a clinical and a research perspective. However, when I discussed the importance I was placing on the therapist-patient relationship, Amy Jones, an experienced psychedelic therapist, warned me. I wonder if seeing the relationship as a healing mechanism might fuel a grandiosity in some that exacerbates the risk of falling out of balance. This is a very important warning. When a therapist becomes inflated, unethical behavior can follow. Too often, that means crossing boundaries or inappropriate sexual behavior. Jones suggested that peer supervision, consultation, or just good friends could keep the psychedelic therapist grounded and in moral alignment. Preserving numinous experiences. Creative expression via art, poetry, movement, or music is one of the best ways to preserve a journey experience. In the creative process, there is an inner movement from the imaginal realm of the ceremony into a more concrete form in the outer world. Then that image can be perceived consciously and allowed to re-enter the psyche. Something from the journey is captured in this way and moved through different states of consciousness. Jung's paintings in the Red Book are the best examples of images moved from the inner world into the outer world. His paintings are archetypal and speak to many people in psychic resonance. However, not all of us have talent for creative expression. I must admit, I have written a few journey-inspired poems, but my attempts at art or even traditional mandala drawings with easy-to-use oil pastels are ho-hum, but I'm good at Google searching. After my ketamine journey, I searched for an image that matched my experience of the ground opening up and earth beings arising out of the depths to sing to me. Not an easy vision to find on the internet, but photos of Fingal's Cave on the Isle of Staffa off the coast of Scotland were close enough. The photos do not exactly match my ketamine vision, but the structure of the cave has the same feeling of the earth opening up, and the photos bring me back to that exalted state of the journey. Integration means exactly this, to bring an expanded state of consciousness into consensus reality, so the feeling, meaning, significance, teaching can transfer from the imaginal realm of the journey into daily life. So what's the meaning of my earth-opening experience? I can't put it into words, but I've spent a good part of my life living on the dramatic edges of continents, similar to the landscape surrounding Fingal's Cave. From my first arrival in Big Sur at age 20 to the island off the coast of Maine where I now live, my physical environment matches this imaginal landscape. These extreme coastal cliffs open my heart with a primal sense of belonging. Numinous experiences must be recognized, valued, and allowed to continue in the psyche, free of psychological interpretation. With luck and intention, these images will manifest in unexpected ways as life unfolds. Integrating numinous experiences. The only way I know for therapists to be able to recognize when an image is numinous is from their own in-depth experiences in expanded states of consciousness. This is the critical difference between therapists who have minimal entheogenic experience and those who are well-traveled. Psychologist Elizabeth Nielsen raised the legal problem with providing entheogenic journeys as part of the training for psychedelic therapists. Current training programs might offer a breath workshop or travel out of the country to retreat centers where a medicine journey is legal. This approach is better than no opportunity, but it provides very limited experience, especially when compared with what the underground elders have done. The therapist needs to develop an inner map based on their own experiences with numinous images, childhood history, past lives, personal or collective trauma, ancestral history, and current life issues. Traveling through these states of consciousness, personal and transpersonal, will yield a familiarity with a wide-ranging psychic landscape. The therapist learns how to move from these inner spaces to the outer world and back again in their own lives. By doing their own work, they develop a kind of psychic fluidity across states of consciousness that enables them to recognize the level of material the client is reporting. There has been such a need to understand how best to make use of these amazing journeys that we have professionally barged ahead with little experience. I feel we should just admit that we don't know if there is even a best way to do psychedelic integration therapy. A study team at Yale didn't mince words. While psychedelic integration is widely discussed as part of psychedelic therapy, it remains vaguely conceived, under-theorized, and may lack an operational relationship to the problem being treated. We are only just beginning to describe a few different approaches. However, we do know one thing from the underground elders. Even though they don't do psychedelic therapy, they all started with their own healing. Not one of them said, "I was called to do this work," and launched into guiding others. They all said in one way or another, "I was on the path of my own healing." And each of them has continued along that path, working with the medicines throughout their lives. As they say, this is a way of life, one that is never done. As I've mentioned, many of them had childhood spiritual experiences that inspired them to search for expanded states of consciousness. Author Joe Tafur recently told me that the Shipibo shamans describe such children as the curious ones. The women guides in this book were primed and able to recognize the sacred healing power of their medicine experiences. Somehow, the territory felt familiar, and they have persisted, working on themselves for years without any intention of stopping. Working with the medicines and their own healing is the central theme of their lives. As of today, this elder guide has been working with the medicines on herself and with others for decades. Doing so, she said, we encounter our core wound. Oh, this again. With a shamanic perspective, Radha agreed. We can't get away from our family of origin work. Early trauma is a spiritual attack like soul loss. That energy sticks and needs to be cleaned in ceremony. Medrith said, we can do deep work on family healing. And she often does ceremonies with entire families present. Other elders mentioned family of origin and early life wounding, and how these healing themes resurface over time, even after decades of journeys. Theirs is an important long-term perspective when we consider psychedelic integration. It's too simplistic to assume we integrate an experience and the core issue is resolved. Or if the core issue is not resolved, that we haven't integrated our experience. Psychedelic integration covers a far more complex process of healing and unfolding throughout life. Levels of integration. In this section, I propose several levels of psychedelic integration, but I write it as a psychotherapist. It's not based on my interviews. The elder guides are very clear about their boundaries, and they don't offer psychotherapy as part of their journey work. They are guides, not therapists. Some are willing to do follow-up sessions, but when more is needed, they refer people to a therapist who is a kindred spirit, or they suggest another ceremony. I, however, have spent my adult life either in therapy or practicing therapy, and I think that psychedelic integration, however we describe it, is a vital part of any journey. The most basic level of psychedelic integration, or the simplest approach, especially in a group ceremony, is a sharing circle the morning after, where each person describes an aspect of their experience, usually by holding a talking stick and taking turns. Depending upon the size of the group, each person might have an informal time limit of 5 to 10 minutes. The leader or another participant might be allowed to add a comment, but there's a very limited exchange. The goal is usually reverent listening to the story each person selects to tell from their all-night experience. The next level, which I refer to with a slight snarky intonation, is what I call spa integration. Rest, walk in nature, write in your journal, get a massage, attend a yoga class. These are all good things to do, but they miss the opportunity to sift through an experience, to do the inner work necessary, to reflect and mull over any personal messages and meanings that can emerge from a journey. Such insights or teachings need to be attended to in some way that preserves them for future reflection. If these thoughts are not recorded, they are like dreams that disappear by lunchtime, like gossamer threads that float away in the breeze. What was hard-won overnight can quickly become unavailable to conscious memory, no matter how relaxed the person is. On the other hand, if the person does none of the spa integration suggestions and dives right back into their daily life, they can also lose contact with their ceremony experience and miss any teachings that might arise. In fact, there's a rebound effect that some guides and therapists have begun to notice. Especially when working with ketamine, some people shut down immediately once the drug effect wears off. No matter how open and receptive they might have been during the journey, they revert right back to their defensive structure afterward. This is very frustrating for the therapists who thought they were making amazing progress, only to see the issues buried as deeply as before, with defenses hardened. In the next day or so, some people choose to re-enter an expanded state through meditation, dreams, or listening to the same music from the journey. These are ways to travel back into the ceremony, but in a state of consciousness that's in between the psychedelic experience and consensus reality. This consolidates the experience and keeps it vitally alive for post-ceremony reflection. In the psychedelic-assisted research studies, there are at least 3 90-minute therapy sessions devoted to integration. According to a manual for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, these sessions generally include a discussion of the meaning of memories, thoughts, feelings, and insights experienced during the sessions, and how these new meanings will be manifested in daily living. The therapist will have notes from anything the person said during the session, which can help bring elements of the experience into the light of day and consensus reality. Also, the therapist knows the person's history and can bridge meaning and teachings from the journey into their understanding of the past as they move into the future. The therapeutic relationship is the container for the journey and should be considered a critical aspect of the setting. The continuity between the preparatory sessions, the ceremony, and the follow-up sessions is crucial. It establishes the relationship between guide and patient and encourages the connection from intention to insight to actions. The trust and support during the ceremony help the journeyer to let go during that crucial moment of surrender. And this can make the difference between a traumatizing journey and a mystical one. NYU psychologist Tony Bossis emphasized this in an interview. The therapeutic rapport and trust between the participant and the therapists significantly helps in mitigating anxiety during the psilocybin session. It should be noted that the significance of the therapeutic alliance in traditional psychotherapy is well established from both a clinical and a research perspective. However, when I discussed the importance I was placing on the therapist-patient relationship, Amy Jones, an experienced psychedelic therapist, warned me, "I wonder if seeing the relationship as a healing mechanism might fuel a grandiosity in some that exacerbates the risk of falling out of balance." This is a very important warning. When a therapist becomes inflated, unethical behavior can follow. Too often, that means crossing boundaries or inappropriate sexual behavior. Jones suggested that peer supervision, consultation, or just good friends could keep the psychedelic therapist grounded and in moral alignment. Preserving numinous experiences. Creative expression via art, poetry, movement, or music is one of the best ways to preserve a journey experience. In the creative process, there is an inner movement from the imaginal realm of the ceremony into a more concrete form in the outer world. Then that image can be perceived consciously and allowed to re-enter the psyche. Something from the journey is captured in this way and moves through different states of consciousness. Jung's paintings in the Red Book are the best examples of images moved from the inner world into the outer world. His paintings are archetypal and speak to many people in psychic resonance. However, not all of us have talent for creative expression. I must admit, I have written a few journey-inspired poems, but my attempts at art or even traditional mandala drawings with easy-to-use oil pastels are ho-hum, but I'm good at Google searching. After my ketamine journey, I searched for an image that matched my experience of the ground opening up and earth beings arising out of the depths to sing to me. Not an easy vision to find on the internet, but photos of Fingal's Cave on the Isle of Staffa off the coast of Scotland were close enough. The photos do not exactly match my ketamine vision, but the structure of the cave has the same feeling of the earth opening up, and the photos bring me back to that exalted state of the journey. Integration means exactly this, to bring an expanded state of consciousness into consensus reality, so the feeling, meaning, significance, teaching can transfer from the imaginal realm of the journey into daily life. So what's the meaning of my earth-opening experience? I can't put it into words, but I've spent a good part of my life living on the dramatic edges of continents, similar to the landscape surrounding Fingal's Cave. From my first arrival in Big Sur at age 20 to the island off the coast of Maine where I now live, my physical environment matches this imaginal landscape. These extreme coastal cliffs open my heart with a primal sense of belonging. Numinous experiences must be recognized, valued, and allowed to continue in the psyche, free of psychological interpretation. With luck and intention, these images will manifest in unexpected ways as life unfolds. Integrating numinous experiences. The only way I know for therapists to be able to recognize when an image is numinous is from their own in-depth experiences in expanded states of consciousness. This is the critical difference between therapists who have minimal entheogenic experience and those who are well-traveled. Psychologist Elizabeth Nielsen raised the legal problem with providing entheogenic journeys as part of the training for psychedelic therapists. Current training programs might offer a breath workshop or travel out of the country to retreat centers where a medicine journey is legal. This approach is better than no opportunity, but it provides very limited experience, especially when compared with what the underground elders have done. The therapist needs to develop an inner map based on their own experiences with numinous images, childhood history, past lives, personal or collective trauma, ancestral history, and current life issues. Traveling through these states of consciousness, personal and transpersonal, will yield a familiarity with a wide-ranging psychic landscape. The therapist learns how to move from these inner spaces to the outer world and back again in their own lives. By doing their own work, they develop a kind of psychic fluidity across states of consciousness that enables them to recognize the level of material the client is reporting. Her issues with her mother never disappeared, but as her spiritual awareness expanded, her childhood history shrank and became less relevant. Her numinous experiences were integrated into and inspired her current life choices. If the therapist has not done enough inner exploration, they won't have the fluidity or experience to recognize the psychic source of the client's material. The therapist might misinterpret a transpersonal experience as a personal one. This is one of the most common mistakes a therapist can make in psychedelic integration. Such a misinterpretation can disrupt a therapeutic alliance at a deep level. The patient is sharing a very private experience, one they might have never told anyone for fear of being demeaned, misunderstood, or called crazy. The person feels as though they are placing their very soul in the hands of the therapist. If the therapist misinterprets this moment, the person will likely cut off such sharing and terminate therapy. That's how strongly people feel about such misinterpretations. For example, Ariel herself described one of her childhood spiritual experiences to me as a dream. However, later, she seriously objected to this phrasing and wrote, "I cannot accept labeling these childhood memories as dreams. I still have vivid memories of these early, very real luminous experiences. Now I realize these naturally induced visions were from realms in expanded states of consciousness. These are sacred images, real and alive as ever in her psyche." As I've mentioned, I maintain that the psychedelic therapist's personal variables make an important difference in the therapeutic alliance. How much entheogenic experience they have, how much personal therapy they've done, and how skillful they are about their use of self. The therapist's ability to differentiate between personal history, archetypal material, and numinous experience and respond accordingly is central. I recently told a dream to a Jungian analyst friend of mine. It was a lucid dream about being in meditation and waking up, still in the dream, to realize that my mind was silent for the last 10 minutes of the meditation. I assure you that such silence has never happened to me in my waking life attempts at meditation. My friend's response? He listened carefully and simply said, "That's a big dream." Jung wrote that big dreams often prove to be the richest jewel in the treasure house of psychic experience. These dreams have to do with the realization of a part of the personality which has not yet come into existence, but is still in the process of becoming. My friend was able to recognize my dream as a big dream because he himself has had such dreams and had them recognized by other Jungian analysts. This example highlights the importance I've placed on both personal experience and professional mentorship. Not much needs to be said in response to a numinous experience. In fact, the less said, the better. My dream, and the memory of it, continues to work inside me. It's as alive today as it was when I had it, and how this dream unfolds within me is as ineffable as an entheogenic journey, shrouded in mystery. In psychedelic integration work, the therapist must be able to not only recognize numinous moments in dreams or journeys, but be willing to be personally expanded by the client's sharing of the experience, the energy coming through. The therapist has to be fluid and permeable to shift states of consciousness in response to the client, to receive the numinous story with an open heart, and hold such experiences with reverence and awe. Anne Shulgin, Working with the Soul and the Shadow. I met with Anne in her comfy kitchen at her ranch in the San Francisco Bay Area. Spry and alert, in her late 80s, Anne was kind enough to take time from working on her own book to speak with me, a conversation I now treasure even more, since Anne sadly died in 2022. Anne started off our conversation by saying, "Therapists must have done work on their own shadow. You have to know the territory. If not, you can do damage. The person must trust you 100%, which only happens if you come from a place of knowledge and experience. If the person is somewhere you haven't been, it becomes obvious that the therapist doesn't really understand. You can't fool around with this. It's the work of the soul." The emphasis was Anne's. Anne knew what she wanted to say, and I scribbled notes as quickly as she talked. How people change is very individual, different for each person. A good therapeutic sign is when the person can hear the therapist. Borderlines don't. They just want company. They have no intention of getting well. And people with strong religious beliefs don't listen either. Then she gave a warning. Don't engage defense mechanisms people have, or they will withdraw. If the person is resistant, you'll have less effect. So talk about the resistance. Anne continued, "This is deep work with people. You have to be able to feel love and care for them. If they make you uncomfortable, ask yourself why." I felt like Anne was distilling decades of practice into the most essential teachings while still being very practical. She said, "Drink lots of water. It's not a matter of dose. Drugs are each totally different. 2CB, similar to mescaline, will take you out into the universe. People can still talk after the first 20 minutes. They will eventually share." Then, almost if we were on a journey together, Anne went to a whole deeper level. Everyone has a deep unconscious fear of being worthless from early trauma. This is a big issue you have to confront. You're a worthless piece of shit. Anne surprised me with her bluntness. She looked like a sweet grandmotherly type, but her words cut through that image. Anne stated the core issue so elegantly. The shadow work is about removing this fear of being worthless. She saw this process as central to healing, and she was well known for her work with the shadow, what she called the dark side, for self-protection and survival. These are the repressed, closed-off, long-denied aspects of his nature, all the unacceptable, shameful, dirty, monstrous parts as taught by his parents. The person doesn't want to be this way consciously and is terrified that this is who I am unconsciously. This is the fear of being a worthless piece of shit. Jungian analyst Murray Stein added color to the description of the shadow. Generally, the shadow has an immoral or at least a disreputable quality, containing features of a person's nature that are contrary to the customs and moral conventions of society. Anne saw the confrontation with the shadow as a central healing mechanism of the entheogenic journey, emphasizing a great deal of discussion before any drug ingestion, not only about the nature and function of the shadow, but also of the need to feel compassion for the innocent child he had been, and to understand why and how the child developed certain habits of behavior and emotional response. Anne was clearly different from the other elder guides in that she prepared the client for shadow work. She engaged in a therapeutic dialogue throughout the journey, and then she looked for certain changes or indications of healing after the session. Her approach is important to this topic because of her historical role in the development of the therapeutic use of entheogens, and also because she so carefully cultivated the integration process before, during, and after the journey. Talking with me, Anne explained, the shadow usually presents as an animal, a beast. The most terrifying work is to face that monster in the basement, the unconscious. Step into and see through the eyes of the monster. This was quite a dramatic moment in our conversation, but I intentionally interrupted the flow to clarify. Is this your original technique? To step into the beast and look through the eyes? I asked, admittedly being a stickler for appropriate credit. Yes, Anne said. I went back to writing down every word. She said, once you step into the beast, you have total lack of fear and a tremendous surge of power. The beast is eventually tamed, incorporated, owned, appreciated, brought home, and becomes the prince. You learn to love that side of yourself, and that's the transformation. The shadow is a part of yourself, an ally, a fearless friend, Anne continued, but it never develops good table manners. At that point, we laughed. We were sitting at the kitchen table.
It's weird to talk about it because it reminds me that we don't know what we're doing at all. That we sit in rooms discussing all this stuff and you know, a war rages, ignorant armies clash by night, that whole thing. But, you know, this extraordinarily powerful thing, the depth of which, the measure of which is so hard to take, lies very near. What I had hoped for from ayahuasca was my brother and I, when we got into this DMT stuff, we said, we've got to slow down this movie. I mean, you get in there for about 70 seconds, the first 35 of which is taken up with you checking all your meters to make sure you're not dead. Because that's what you assume, you know, you say, I did it, I'm dead, fuck it, I'm dead. And then you say, but, you know, chest rising and falling, thoughts continuing in linear, apparently I'm not dead. Apparently I'm something else. Well, then by the time you sort it out, you're usually coming down. And people come down babbling, raving. I mean, I've seen, you know, people who've headed mega corporations, people who are accustomed to ordering hundreds of people around, just completely come apart because it is so unexpected. So our notion was slow the movie down, get in there. And ayahuasca looks like a strategy for doing that. And largely, I would say what we've learned from 20, 25 years of dealing with this is that our strategy was right. Ayahuasca will let you in to these places, and so will psilocybin. What I've decided, based on experience, is that what I'm interested in is a very tiny subset of all the smorgasbord of possible altered states and experiences that life and nature offer up. That there are many altered states: datura, ketamine, MDMA, endlessly, and then states brought on by ordeal and fasting and meditation. I am only interested as a phenomenologist, definitely more with the attitude of the scientist than some kind of conclusion drawer. I'm interested in this very circumscribed area in organic nature because it's not supposed to be there, folks. It's like a little a doorway into the previous universe or something. The whole, at the height of Islam in the 10th century, the poets of the Mughal dynasty said of the city of Isfahan in Iran, because of its mosques and architecture, that it was half the world. Isfahan is half the world. DMT is half the world. The problem with DMT is its incredible power, that only the most intrepid can form any coherent impression whatsoever of what's going on if it's a strong trip. I mean, there are sub-threshold trips where you just graze the tummy of the beast, and then people come down with various models of archetypal closure with the cosmic carnival. That's the archetype of DMT, is the cosmic circus. But if you actually get a strong hit of it, which is in no way dangerous, but simply a true boundary dissolving hit, it's into some place. It's almost like, I once said, there's danger of death by astonishment. and I think that's true. That's the major danger, is death by astonishment. Because you just get in there and you say, my God, I thought I had some expectation of what was possible, and instead this is just so blown that, and it somewhat freaks me out. I have to confess, it is so alien, so huge, so complete in itself, so unrelated to our petty concerns on this planet. I mean, I went to it first as an art historian, and I was a Jungian. I mean, I had Jungian proclivities, and I thought, what does this say about the archetypes? There is no archetype for this. Not in the painting of the Bushman, not in the ecstasies of Hildegard von Bingen, not in the ravings of Mandaean ecstatics. The human spiritual experience never got this deep, never tore open this doorway. And yet what? It's a long toke away for an ordinary human being. How could something that titanic and beautiful and cosmic and alien be kept secret?
There could also be different healing mechanisms with different medicines, different mechanisms of healing across different levels of consciousness. In other words, one experience might help me heal from feeling like a worthless piece of shit, while another entheogenic experience might help me accept death with equanimity. Or an addiction might be healed when a plant spirit admonishes, stop drinking. Healing works in mysterious ways, and we might be limiting our understanding by trying to fit the process into a cause and effect paradigm. This leads to that, especially when we don't really know how it works. I did a recent presentation on psychedelic integration, and after every few slides, I had one that said, what are we integrating into what? The first what refers to the priority focus. What was the original intention? What does the person choose to recount from all that happened in the journey? What does the therapist choose to focus on? What are we integrating into what is even more important and more difficult to consider? Are we pouring new wine into old bottles? Are we entering new data into an old program? As I said earlier, I'd rather not talk about integration. I'd rather talk about transformation. How can the psychedelic therapist support and nurture the transformation of the whole person, what I call the psychic architecture, the way the personality is organized? The experience should not be co-opted by the same personality structure to inflate the ego with yet another great story or accomplishment, as in the consumerism approach to sacred journeys. Yes, I've been to, and this is what I experienced. Signs of transformation. For Anne, transformation was when the person realized the shadow was only part of the self, not the whole self, and not bad. As the person becomes conscious of what was previously unconscious, the shadow is transformed into an inner resource. Anne called upon this resource when she was playing a challenging game of chess or walking down a dark street. Be in your beast side. Step in and step out consciously. Make decisions with your conscious self. As she wrote elsewhere, ultimately, the shadow will take its place as a devoted ally and protector, available when needed to the whole self, respected and validated by the conscious mind. Anne's perspective was Jungian, so this work with the shadow was her outcome measure, not easily quantified. In general, the current psychedelic research uses psychological scales to measure diagnostic symptoms, as well as physiological measures to confirm self-reports on smoking or drinking. NYU has used video interviews to document clinical transformations in terminal patients. The way we conceptualize and measure the outcome of an entheogenic journey will influence how we focus the process of integration. The underground elders each have their own way of describing transformation, but some themes emerged. First, they described warning signs if there was not enough progress. Maureen said, "If we don't listen to what the medicines say to us, their wisdom will go away." Rose surprised me with her strength to set limits. "If there is no change, then there are no more ceremonies." This reminds me of the Seinfeld character, the soup Nazi, who so famously said, "No soup for you." Moreover, Rose warned that the spirits will scold you if there's no action, or they'll purposely confuse you if you're not listening. Cedar, equally soft-spoken, also set strong boundaries. "I say no to people who want ceremonies too often." Radiant Hawk said, "The medicines want to know whether we're active partners, cultivating our relationship with them." A number of women echoed this process of developing personal relationships with the medicine. Medrith explained, "I can feel the plants are a part of me, inside my body." Aliana said, "You become the medicine. You walk it. You pray it." Rose explained that it's my relationship with the plant spirits that protects me. They help me power up to protect myself. Radha, with her indigenous training, shared her experience of dieting with a plant. "I become infused with the awareness of the master plant I'm dieting. I notice how I receive information from that plant and how that changes over time. My channel opens and I tune in to the station for that particular plant. This connection remains available and then opens more fully when needed. It's always present. If I've dieted well and maintained a good practice, I fall into sync with the plant. I become it. Ayahuasca, the mainstay of my practice. Ayahuasca is my constant companion." A number of the elders mentioned the heart. Mary talked about bringing the teaching into the heart, and she shared how her work with journeying gave her permission to love, and noted that, "My heart flowered." Debbie also described how her heart opened as a result of her personal medicine work. "I have faith in the process, not a belief, a knowing." She sees life as therapy, which was something I used to look for in my psychotherapy clients to indicate they were ready to terminate treatment. Their lives were unfolding in a way that enabled them to grow and learn on their own. Life with a capital L is the real therapist. None of the elders referenced psychological symptoms related to psychiatric diagnoses, which is what the current research protocols emphasize. The women guides were more philosophical, having the perspective that working with the medicines is a way of being in the world, a way of life, a lifelong path. People become happier, more creative, and more resilient. A number of women talked about a deepening of the way people experience their bodies as a sign of transformation. They say that people become more at home in their bodies, learn how to clean their energetic bodies, let go of stuff they no longer need to carry psychically. There is a sense of living in two worlds, being grounded in the physical body and more aware of the subtle body. Jessica, an elder with a private psychotherapy practice, cited Angelus Arian, who taught how to walk a mystical path with practical feet. Cedar, from a shamanic point of view, described how to be present in your feet. Mary, who works with mythopoetic realities, said, "There are dozens of mythologies," indicating a rich source of archetypes and ancestral support. There's always something to learn. You can embody mythological symbols or visions, leading to an expanded array of inner resources for support and teachings. The guides also looked for psychological changes as part of the process of working with the medicines. Janet, the guide who is also a therapist, said, "The more medicine work you do, the more other parts of the personality emerge. You become more multidimensional." Cedar looked for a deepening growth in wisdom and compassion. Medrith said, "As you use the medicines over time, the process becomes more refined. You get more specific help." This process of refinement leads to a more sensitive perception, an opening to expansive subtle realms, trusting non-ordinary clues from the natural world. Radiant Hawk described this process as learning how to be truly present to spirit. She teaches how to move energy, how to transform the heavy energy of the physical body into the lighter energy of vibration. The women elder guides point to the same shift in a variety of ways. Darlene said, "My journey is part of a larger healing. We are never in ceremony for ourselves alone. The medicine journeys heal outside of time," Radha explained. "They cross generations and go to the origin to call in joy, fortification, and light." Maureen talked about building inner capacity, inner space for rearrangement to hold that change. Cedar said that her mystical experience led to a bigger perspective. Jessica described her own shift. "You see, everything connects, becomes more fluid, more creative, curious. I'm more open, filled with awe and wonder. Healing happens. I'm bigger than this." She explained that in this process, there's less identification with the personal, and you arrive at a bigger point of view. Medrith said, "You become less of a victim as you unravel the knots from your personal history." These are the best descriptions of transformation that I've ever heard, and they have little to do with psychotherapeutic insight. The women guides are describing a shift in awareness, a shift in perspective that leads to a different way of being in the world. Connie Grouds described this same shift during her apprenticeship to become a shamana. "My personal story was transcended and then transformed. This allowed for a new perception to be possible. The mystical experience lifted me out of my common set, my personal stories. It opened new possibilities. I didn't have to come back to the same constellation." The elder guides have witnessed thousands of people transcending their personal stories and then transforming their lives. These are two separate processes, and both are essential. Integration is about stabilizing and deepening the shift in perspective, and then supporting how that new perspective manifests and expands into the person's daily life. a shower of cosmic love. Near-death experiences lead to the same shift in perspective, and Alcoholics Anonymous claims that hitting bottom is what leads to transformation. Sometimes it's a spontaneous mystical or quantum experience that changes everything. I'm partial to Anne Shulgin's description of being held in the loving hands of God. She called this one of the most healing experiences a human being can have. I've had this experience of cosmic love, which she considered the greatest force in the universe, and I agree with her. The overflowing downpour of total and unconditional acceptance and love permeates the body and creates a new template in the psyche, one that heals on both psychological and spiritual levels. This experience of being loved can heal core attachment issues. As I wrote about in Listening to Ayahuasca, the shower of cosmic love transforms maladaptive beliefs, such as, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough. These old schemas or life traps form part of the personality architecture that can be dismantled or rewired during a medicine journey and then consciously restructured in integration. Combining attachment theory with the rebus, relaxed beliefs under psychedelics, model leads to a novel understanding of how healing happens. As one study said, psychedelics may reduce the influence of insecure, defensive internal working models, schemas or life traps, opening them up to healthy revision. On a spiritual level, the overwhelming experience of being held in the loving hands of God can turn an atheist into a mystic. The accompanying shift in worldview opens up new beliefs about the universe, reality, the interconnectedness of all things, and life after death. The worldview is not only reorganized, but transformed. Whatever way the shift happens, the impact is the same. People become more spiritual and less materialistic. Their values and priorities are less about fame and fortune, and more about relationships, health, and how to contribute to the world. We do have to be realistic, however, as many people bounce in and out of AA meetings, and mystical experiences lead to inflation. We don't all transform our lives after a transcendent experience. Choice lies at the heart of the matter, Myron Stolaroff, the author of The Secret Chief, wrote in his memoir. The choice is to live out of that mystical state of consciousness in our ordinary moments. Maureen explained that she often witnesses an existential turning point, a choice. I watch for a shift in how the person embraces being alive, similar to choosing to come back during a near-death experience. At that point, something shifts. She explained that some people are pissed off to be here on this planet. They're mad at God. This work brings people to the point of choice to be here. This reminds me of Anne Shulgin's rule for a guided MDMA journey. Do not go through the death door. It's a choice to live this life you are given. Radiant Hawk captured this existential question. We need to learn how to live on this earth and be joyful. Darlene expressed this another way. To say thank you for everything is a hard place to get to. Anne Shulgin agreed. Say yes to everything that is.
Stop, drop, and roll. I am a New York State licensed psychoanalyst and licensed mental health counselor and have been in private practice for more than 30 years. The New York Times and Newsday have called me the love doctor due to my work with singles, although now I specialize in relationships and communication skills. As I write this, I'm 70 years of age. Since age 50, I've done MDMA, or methylene dioxymethamphetamine, over 65 times. Allow me to clarify. MDMA has been known over the years as ecstasy, or Molly. But this book is a personal tale about my relationship to MDMA, not ecstasy or Molly. The three were once synonymous, but no longer are. Drug dealers have cashed in on the reputation of these brand names and have pulled the old bait and switch ploy. These days, substances sold on the street or in clubs under the name ecstasy or Molly often contains MDMA, but usually also contains inferior or even harmful adulterants. So unless you can swear by your source or have a testing kit, which is inexpensive, legal, and easy to obtain online, see also Chapter 7, you just never know what you're getting. The reason I use listening to ecstasy as my title is not only to be recognizable to those who know MDMA by this name, but also because MDMA speaks to me of the possibility of living an ecstatic life. So for the purposes of this book, I use the terms ecstasy and MDMA interchangeably. I hope the reader can forgive any confusion that may result. I should also clarify that I do not use MDMA in my practice, as that would threaten my licenses. I also never practice, nor do I write for that matter, high in any way. Indeed, most of my clients, a word I prefer to patients, as the former implies a more person-to-person humanistic approach to psychotherapy, have no idea about my other life, although that will change should they read this. I wrote this book for several reasons. To testify about my personal discovery that MDMA can be a life-enhancing experience across the adult lifespan. I'm giving a little wink to my fellow boomers here. To set the record straight about how to use MDMA and how not to, and to acknowledge that it's not for everyone. To legitimize happiness-inducing experiences as potentially transformative and valid in their own right. To tell the story of my life and marriage, and how by sheer serendipity the two of us happened upon a nascent, vibrant cultural renaissance underway just beneath the media radar and spearheaded by millennials, and how we got to hobnob with the locals' psychedelerati. To declare myself done with hiding in the chemical closet for fear of being shamed or stigmatized, and to help others do the same because I know there are so many of us. Hiding. The difference between the face I show the world and who I really am has simply become too burdensome for me. I've heard some say, in relation to my drug use, "Aren't you a little old for that?" This made me consider whether I should, at this age, be concerned about how others might judge me. If anything, I'm too old for that. This is one way aging has freed me. And finally, I've written this book out of the longing for people to see what I've seen and to hear what MDMA has to say. To show people the land promised to us all. To give them hope in this time of hatred and chaos. I want them to know there is, however out there it appears, a way home. One we can all have now if we but find the gumption to claim it. In the name of each other, our children, and of all living beings today, and especially tomorrow. Whenever I've found myself on fire in my life to the point where I've started approaching burnout, I've learned to follow an old adage. Stop, drop, and roll. I then carve out time, usually weeks in advance, to stop my life's merry-go-round for a day, drop some MDMA, and allow the roll, the MDMA experience, to replenish my being. I call this responsible recreational drug use. The very notion may sound counterintuitive to the reader's acculturated ears, as it once did to mine. But for the community I've discovered and that my wife Shelley and I have helped nurture over the past 15 years here in New York, the responsible middle way between abstention and abuse is the way to a fuller life. We found that having a mature and fact-based approach to using MDMA to be of enormous benefit to us. Potentially one of the world's most beneficial psychoactive chemicals, and one that almost always bestows a secret smile upon its users, MDMA is a much maligned and misunderstood compound, often slandered by a media always hot for another scare the pants off the parents story. But in fact, MDMA is a sheep in wolf's clothing, an angel depicted with horns. It's an exotic chemical with a devoted esoteric following, and its benefits are a well-kept, open secret. Indeed, the closer one gets to MDMA, the better it looks. In its pure form, and when used responsibly, it remains practically impossible to OD on. What makes MDMA an uncanny chemical is its versatility. It has been shown in clinical trials to bring profound and lasting relief to those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, such as victims of sexual violence and traumatized soldiers back from Iraq. Or it can help a couple trying to reclaim the lost heart of their relationship. Yet this same substance, at the same dosage, can be used at an all-night rave to dance ecstatically with 1,000 others in unified wild abandon. Is there another substance on the planet that can claim such a range of applications? Those silly depictions on sitcoms or in the movies aside, MDMA is neither hallucinogenic nor is it technically a psychedelic substance. Most who've experienced an LSD or psilocybin, magic mushroom trip, and who've also rolled on MDMA, consider the latter to be, for the most part, much easier to navigate. It's not mind expanding, it's more heart opening and body bolstering, and it's better classified as an empathogen. That is, it arouses deep feelings of empathy with and connection to others. For the purposes of this book, however, I will often group MDMA and psychedelics together, as they are all powerful mind and heart-opening medicines. Although there is much to say about MDMA as a powerful medicine with promising applications, this is not a book about the chemical or the science around it, but of human chemistry. It's the story of how this substance has provided a pleasurable backdrop to a full life, as well as to a happy and healthy marriage, one that's been celebrated twice in the New York Times. Shelley and I would have done fine without MDMA, but slowly, over time, it's not only helped our marriage and improved our overall quality of life, it's also opened a door to a hidden, underground world that we'd otherwise never have known was there. A whole community, wonderful friends, and a second childhood to boot. Not a small surprise for two senior citizens dreading the aging process. MDMA can point the person inward or outward. Shelley and I and those in our community have found it to be the chemical of connection with oneself or another. It's helped imbue our lives with a renewed sense of purpose, meaning, and joy. This book is also my coming out of the closet story. This includes how I have struggled with feeling shame about my drug use, but have overcome that to embrace a healthy self-regard, even pride, about my explorations. I've come to believe that such explorations can be fun, and that fun is essential for mental health and well-being. Indeed, fun, joy, play, and pleasure are potentially transformational experiences. Recreational drug use, when done responsibly, may be more frivolous than clinical research, yet it can be more profound than one might think. As responsible adults, many of us tend to trivialize and devalue recreation. But these days in particular, as I find my free time melting away like a polar ice cap, with reality slapping me in the face every time I flip on a screen, and the world looking like it's about to explode from fear, greed, and hatred, well, I say extraordinary times call for extraordinary pleasures. So in the face of this onslaught, we've found MDMA to be a nectar for the neurons and a tonic for the tense. And as a hardworking dude now in his early 70s, rolling is not only a way of balancing my life, but of celebrating it as well. In other words, it's time for some serious fun. My wife Shelley and I, along with hundreds of thousands of others, have found MDMA, when used correctly, to be non-addictive and user-friendly. We can be out and about and people will just think we're having a nice day.
As we shift consciousness to love what is, our level of responsibility expands to include a wider community across time and the world. Maureen described how our goals move from head to heart, and this is how we find our purpose in the world. Medrit said the process is learning what our spiritual job is, what we're called to do. Mary asked, what is our agreement with our ancestors? Why am I here? Why was I born to these people? How can our unique constellation of gifts Respond to what is needed in this world. Altogether, the elders I interviewed from the psychedelic underground have thousands of hours of experience with entheogens via their own journeys and guiding others. Their role in guiding entheogenic journeys has no real counterpoint in our current Western world. They are not therapists, although they're therapeutic. Most of them don't have graduate degrees. They are neither researchers nor medical professionals. They are not ministers, as they do not belong to our religious organization, but their work is sacred. These women have made a cultural shift to live in a sacred world, not bound by the assumptions of Western culture. It's not that they've all adopted an indigenous way of knowing, or even a New Age belief system. They have made a cultural shift as a result of their extensive psychedelic experience, so that their relationship to time and space, causality and synchronicity, is no longer Western. The women attend to signs in the natural world, shift easily between states of consciousness, and receive guidance from unseen others. They swim in the sacred. I think they are the closest our culture has to the Eleusinian priestesses who held the sacred container for visionary journeys in ancient Greece. That culture had healing centers and rituals for dream incubation and nighttime journeys. As philosophy professor Mara Lynn Keller wrote, they believed that illness stemmed from a person not being aligned with their divine destiny, and those seeking healing would prepare for a night of dreaming by inviting a visitation of divine presence and purpose into their lives. After a night of dreaming, initiates would tell their dream to attendants. These people were called therapeuta, which is the root word for therapist. The initiate was to follow the divine guidance and to perform some action as directed by the deity in order for healing. It's quite amazing how the current underground guides think of their calling in a very similar way, in that they are also interested in seeing their clients take meaningful action following the ceremony. Charlotte, who works with well-functioning people, wants to see how they manifest their experience. I want to see action in the outer world before next session, not just hooked on experience. I want to see them clean up unfinished business in relationships. So next ceremony, they move on to next step in real-world progress in their lives and functioning. The elder guides follow the protocol of preparation and setting intentions, doing the ceremony, and then integration or follow-up to varying degrees. It's important to contrast the role of guides with the new profession of psychedelic psychotherapy, which combines both the sitting aspect and the supportive therapy process before and after the journey. Sitting as a guide and providing supportive psychotherapy are two different functions, requiring two different sets of skills. Expertise in both these functions is a lot to ask as a professional requirement. The continuity in the therapeutic alliance from intention to integration is valuable and distinctive from the quality of presence and experience needed in a sitter. It might be helpful in the training of the new cohort of psychedelic therapists to clarify what's needed for each of these two different roles and functions. The current psychedelic renaissance is exploding around the women elders who continue to work underground. A few of the guides have found discrete opportunities to train the next generation of psychedelic therapists, and some are mentoring new guides. All will continue to work underground because that is where they can practice in a sacred manner. That their work with entheogens is sacred is the central theme for all the women elders, no matter what their background or training. This is not to say that the research teams working with these medicines are irreverent. Psychologist Bill Richards, a senior member of the team at Johns Hopkins University, wrote, "If the ultimate healing force is the energy we call love that flows into time from the sacred dimensions of consciousness, the healer becomes the conduit or facilitator." Despite being immersed in medical settings, the research teams make every effort to maintain a sacred container for the entheogenic journeys, while at the same time collecting data, not an easy balance to maintain. The next theme in common for the women elders is they have worked on their personal healing and spiritual development for decades, most of their lives actually. Following such a psycho-spiritual path has been a primary motivator in their lives, opening them to therapy, spiritual trainings, mentorships, and the lifelong use of entheogenic journeys with all the medicines at all dosage levels. These women are intrepid explorers with the required discipline and strength to stay on that steep and sometimes treacherous path for a lifetime. After decades of this level of psycho-spiritual work, a shift happens that allows for greater freedom from personal history. It's not that the women have forgotten their old stories and traumas, but they've attained a certain objective distance that allows for greater flexibility, especially when traveling through their inner psychic space or accompanying others. Combined with awareness, this inner flexibility enables the guide to keep her own issues out of the journey space, so she can provide a clear setting for the client. This capacity to keep their own egos in check is the most important way the guides maintain the sacred nature of entheogenic journeys. In Listening to Ayahuasca, I described how the Shuar shamans took all day to clear and protect the Maloka ceremonial pavilion in preparation for the ayahuasca ceremony that evening. I wondered, what have they been doing all day? I finally decided they were protecting the energetic space from unwanted outer sources. I realize now that the ceremonial space most needs protection from the inner psychic world of the shaman or guide. Besides the obvious corporate financial incentives encroaching upon the psychedelic renaissance and the sacred space of entheogenic use, it's the personal failure of the guide or therapist that most threatens the sacred journey. The crossing of sexual boundaries currently at issue in the psychedelic renaissance is the behavioral manifestation of the guide not being able to protect the sacred journey space. The current psychedelic subculture entering the mainstream is like a smorgasbord of promises. It's a buyer beware marketplace and only likely to become more complicated and difficult to navigate. In this way, it may not be so different from the array of therapists, religious leaders, athletic coaches, and doctors who also cross ethical boundaries for their own satisfaction. Western cultures have yet to create a safe container or ritual for entheogens to be used for spiritual development in a sacred manner. Indigenous peoples have long held sacred ceremonies with elders carrying the tradition within a community setting that values each person's intention and contribution. The sacred use of entheogens in tribal communities supports the priorities of sustainability and reciprocity with the natural world. The elder women guides are carriers of these integrated ways of living with entheogens that Western cultures need to learn.